Hello, my dear Horror Area 51 family. I hope all of you are definitely enjoying our scary story. I just have one request from you, that if you are watching this video and haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please quickly press the subscribe button. It motivates us to bring more such content for you. So let's embark on this journey of a terrifying story. It was the kind of cold only the Atlantic could bring, a biting dampness that seemed to come not from the wind or waves, but from the bones of the world itself. I first arrived at Greymarsh Point, an isolated spit of land jutting out from the coast of Maine, at the end of October, the season when sunsets bleed into the sea too early and nights stretch too long. The lighthouse stood there as it had for over 100 years, tall and pale against the shifting gray of the sky. Locals whispered about it with the same mixture of disdain and fear old New England towns reserved for places where death seemed to linger. But for me, a postgraduate researcher desperate for both solitude and material for my thesis on forgotten maritime lore, it was perfect. I believed in rational explanations, in peeling away superstitions. What I could not have believed was how easily that tower would come to unmake me. Greymarsh Point was nearly inaccessible by car. The road turned to gravel, then eroded, until only an hour of walking in thick marshland brought me to the lighthouse keeper's cottage, its shingles curling like rotting scales. The keeper had been gone decades. The U.S. Coast Guard automated the light in the 70s, but still the beacon swept across the blackening horizon, mechanically dutiful and eerily unmanned. Inside the cottage, dust sheets clung to splintered furniture. Salt had crusted windows from decades of storms. There were journals, though, mildewed ledgers kept by a string of men whose job had been to keep the sea at bay with a single lamp. I ran my hands over them. Some were meticulous logs of shipping traffic, and others were wild tangles of words written in what I could only call panic. I lingered too long on one phrase, inked into the corner of a page from 1897. It moves in the light, always when the lantern turns. The wind rattled the glass just then, and the sweeping beam from the tower crossed the marsh. A coldness gripped me. I told myself it was exhaustion. By the third night, I began to notice the sound. It wasn't the ocean. I had grown used to the thunder of surf crashing against the rocks. This was rhythmic, deliberate, as if boots paced in the gravel outside. Every time the light turned across the cottage, the pacing ceased. In its absence, the footsteps returned. I told myself it was wind in the reeds, the rational explanation. But then came the scratching on the door, long, dragging lines as though nails or claws tested the wood. I tried to look from the window when the beam rolled past. For an instant, my eyes caught a shape, not fully formed, more like the shadow of a thing, stretched thin, faceless, but watching. Sleep became impossible. Every journal I opened seemed to confirm my dread. Pages from men gone mad, speaking of something that walks only in the dark between sweeps of the light. Words repeated across decades. And the question carved again and again into margins. What happens if the light goes out? On the 6th night, the electricity failed. I woke to stillness. The beam no longer moved across the marsh. That steady clockwork heartbeat of the lighthouse had ceased, and my heart thundered in its absence. The cottage slipped into a suffocating black, and in that void, the pacing was everywhere. On the porch, around the cottage, on the roof. I lit a lantern with trembling hands and stumbled toward the tower. Perhaps a fuse had blown. Perhaps a storm had severed the automated system. Anything was better than believing the truth the journals all pointed to. And inside the lighthouse, the spiral staircase loomed upward, cold iron slick beneath my hands. The smell of wet stone filled my nostrils. My lantern flame quivered as though suffocated. Halfway up, the sound came again. Not footsteps this time, but breathing. heavy, dragging inhalations echoing against the walls, above me, below me, around me. My chest locked. I forced myself upward. At the lantern room, I discovered the machinery silent, the bulb unbroken, the switch still on, but it was dark, as though something heavier than shadow swallowed the very concept of light. And reflected in the lens glass was not my lantern's glow, but a second shape, just behind mine, taller, leaner, eyeless, reaching. Salt water dripped from the ceiling. No, not the ceiling, the walls themselves. My breath came shallow. I pressed my palm against the wood. It was slick as gills. Then came the voice, right at the window glass, though no mouth formed shape. You must walk when the light dies. Now this is where my account falters. Rationality breaks. I don't know how many nights passed after that. I remember walking the stairs endlessly. I remember seeing the horizon from the lantern room as though through another's eyes, scanning for ships that never came. I remember pacing in the marsh when the beam swept by, boots crushing reeds, though I never left the cottage. And the journals. I returned again and again to inscribe words I didn't think, my hand propelled by a will not my own. If you find this, if you read these words, then you have come where you should not. The lighthouse has its keeper, but keepers tire. The bargains need renewing. When the lamp falters again, and it will, you may hear the pacing in the gravel. You may see the shadow between sweeps of the light. Do not look fully at it. Do not listen when it speaks. But above all, never let the light go out. Because if you do, you will take my place. I do not know what compelled me to keep writing, only that something in that cursed tower demands a record. Perhaps it is the only way it maintains its hold, through words etched on paper, through stories it forces from the trembling hands of those who survive long enough to serve. Whatever the reason, I could not stop. The journals grew crowded with my scrawl alongside the words of men long dead, all overlapping into the same spiraling refrain. The storm broke on the 8th night. The sea became a living thing with its roar, throwing its black waves onto Greymarsh Point so violently that whole slabs of shore collapsed into foam and spray. I should have fled inland, yet I could not move beyond the marsh path. The moment I tried, the wind pressed against me like a wall, so unnatural, so directed, that I staggered backwards toward the lighthouse. The path vanished in water and night. I realized with terrible clarity I was sealed in with the tower, as surely as a coffin is nailed shut. Before the storm, I had tried once to return to town. The fishing village of Warden's Cove lay scarcely 8 miles inland, a scatter of wooden homes with peeling paint and sagging porches. But when I stumbled in, gaunt and wired-eyed after days at Greymarsh, the reception was as cold as the October wind. Fishermen turned their faces toward nets, and women drew children indoors. An old man at the dock, half drunk on rye, muttered at me over the rim of his bottle. "You shouldn't have gone down there. That's not for folks to touch anymore." I pressed him. What did he mean? He only shook his head, lips thinning gray. Later, the barkeep whispered one line before refusing me further drink. Every time the government sends someone for research, they never last more than a winter, always leave too soon or leave something behind. I demanded to know who else had come before. He would not answer. What I remember most, how quiet the town became as I walked its streets, as though they all knew my fate already, as though I was only a ghost drifting through lives they refused to acknowledge. On the 9th night, I woke to the smell of smoke. For a terrible moment, I was certain the cottage had caught fire, but the air was clear. The smoke wasn't real. It was memory, not mine, but someone else's. I found myself climbing the iron staircase again, lantern shaking. On each landing, the walls carried new marks I could swear had not been there. Scratches, gouges, sometimes full words carved deep into stone. Help. Can't leave. And once, horrifically, I am still here. The beam above did not shine. The lantern room glowed faintly with its strange, dead radiance, a corrosive sort of black light revealing every crack in the glass, every rivulet of condensation trickling like blood down iron. That was when I heard it again, the voice. It no longer came from outside the walls. It whispered directly through the lens, as though the great Fresnel glass itself had learned to speak. The sea does not forget. The sea does not release. I dropped the lantern. The flame smothered quick, and only darkness remained, except for that faint void glow from the lens. When I turned to flee, the figure was there on the stairs. Not fully seen, never fully seen, but always taller than human, limbs too long and head bent unnaturally to fit the stairwell. I felt weight in my chest, as though my heart were sinking into the ocean outside. But instead of falling on me, it turned its head toward the light. And I realized, no, I felt it was waiting for me to return to my post.
By the 10th day, I dug through every corner of the cottage I had ignored before. Beneath a floorboard, I discovered a bundle of brittle newspapers, all yellow with salt. One headline from the Boston Evening Transcript, dated 1899. Lightkeeper at Graymarsh vanishes. Only marks found were bare footprints circling the tower. Another from 1918. Second keeper disappears. Townsfolk demand closure of point. A third, almost identical, from 1943, and again in 1961, each separated by decades, always the same, vanishing, silence, no investigation carried forward. But one article chilled me to the marrow. 1918, survivor found at sea, babbling of the keeper's pact. Buried in the story was the sole quote attributed to the survivor before he died in hospital. The light doesn't warn ships, it warns the land. It's not for them, it's for us. I dropped the paper and staggered away. By the 11th night, reality itself seemed to collapse. Outside the cottage, pools had gathered in the marsh from days of unending rain. Yet when I gazed into them, they did not reflect sky or grass. They reflected the tower alone. Sometimes in those water mirrors, I saw myself pacing the lantern room even when I was nowhere near it. Other times I saw faces, long dead keepers, mouths wide with screams I never heard. And once, most grievously, I saw a ship approaching the headland. A tall black freighter, its deck figures waving frantically toward the lightless point. My chest shattered with panic. I rushed to the tower, smashed switches, shouted at lifeless machinery. Nothing sparked. The light would not return. I watched helplessly as the phantom freighter collided with invisible rocks offshore, split open like an egg. Men plunged into roaring tide. But when I ran to the shore, there was nothing. Only darkness. Only the echoing pace in gravel. That night, I could no longer deny it. The beam kept more than sailors safe. It kept us shut in, so what prowled the marsh could not step beyond its circling reach. And with its absence, I knew what must come. The storm did not cease. By the 12th night, the Atlantic had turned savage, boiling against the cliffs. The sound was no longer waves, but voices, 1,000 drowned men calling in low guttural thunder beneath the thunder itself. I no longer kept time by sun or moon. The skies remained veiled in storm, the air choked with mist. I only knew the rhythm of the marsh, the long, dragging footfalls in gravel and reeds, when the light should have swept, though no beam shone. Whoever, whatever had once been kept back, was now free to move across every shadow. The 13th night changed everything. At first, it was the usual pacing, around the cottage, on the porch, pausing at windows. I held my breath like a soldier in a trench, lamp guttering. Then came a sound new and terrible. A knock. 3 raps upon the cottage door, calm, deliberate. I did not answer. I could not. My throat sealed shut. Yet outside, the voice that had whispered all nights before now spoke with horrid clarity, human in cadence, but hollow as a broken bell. "Keeper, your watch is late." I fell to my knees. I cannot tell you if it was terror or submission, for in that moment something inside me stirred, not revulsion, but a recognition, a sense of duty. I tried to resist. I buried my face in my hands, whispering, "I'm not the keeper, I'm not." But my own voice betrayed me. It sounded like an echo of another man's tone, layered over mine, older, cracked with sea brine. The knock came again, louder. Desperate, I returned to the cottage desk and pulled free yet another mold-warped ledger. I had thought I had read them all, yet here was one hidden in within the false back of a drawer, bound in oilskin. The handwriting was precise, the words almost elegant. The entries told of a man named Rourke, keeper circa 1890. But these were not simple logs. They were a confession. Entry, November 2. The light belongs to no man, but chooses each in their season. They told me it was duty to ships, but I have learned it imprisons what lies beyond the tide. The bargain is simple. Keep the light burning, and it takes only your years. Let it fail, and it takes your flesh.
I read on, shaking, salt dripping from each page as if the sea itself seeped through. His final entry halted me cold. I see the next already forming in shadow. He walks the marsh even now, though he has not yet arrived. The tower makes its choice before the man knows he is chosen. On the 14th night, the light returned. I had not touched a switch, I had not relit a flame, yet from the lantern room, a steady beam swept across the mist again, brighter than I had ever seen. Relief should have filled me, but dread crawled instead, for I knew I had not powered it. The cottage was aglow with its sweeping blaze, and in every pane of glass I saw the same reflection. Not myself, but another man's face, pale and hollow-eyed, stretched thin with decades of storm. He was watching through my features, impatient. The pacing ceased entirely that night. All was silence when the beam turned. But silence was worse. It meant they were waiting, watching. By dawn, I resolved I must leave. No thesis, no research, no knowledge was worth this. The village, the world, even death felt preferable. I gathered what strength I had, forced myself into the marsh, and struck the overland route.
Mud rose to my shins, reeds clawed at my ankles. Hours passed until I reached the road that led back to Warden's Cove. But when I arrived, the town was gone. Where houses had stood, there was only water. Endless marsh flooded with tide. A horizon without rooftops or church steeples, without roads or piers. I stood in a mirror world where all that remained was the lighthouse itself, seen faintly behind me across black water. And in the water's reflection, I saw figures gathering, hundreds of them, pale, blank-eyed, all staring toward Greymarsh Point. The drowned. They waited for me to return. I staggered back to the point before dusk, broken and resigned. The storm had never lessened. The marsh carried their footfalls still. But now every time the lantern swept, I felt my body hold still as if ordered. My breath would pause until the beam passed. My eyes did not blink, as though I too had become one of those restless shadows who must move in rhythm with the light. And I understood at last. The lighthouse is not warning ships. The lighthouse is not warning villagers. The lighthouse is warning the dark itself. And I, God help me, I am meant to be its keeper. I cannot recall when I last slept. Time here is no longer measured by days or nights, only by the turning of the beam, the sweep of light across marsh and cliff, the heartbeat of the tower. Each revolution feels like a command, each pause a judgment. It was on the 16th day, if day can even be called such, that I heard engines. Not the phantom ships from the water mirrors, but something real and modern. A low thrum carried by wind, followed by the harsh crackle of radios. The Coast Guard. I stumbled from the cottage to the headland where the marsh met's rocky shore. Out of the mist, a small cutter pushed against waves, its floodlights cutting through spume. For the first time in weeks, I thought salvation had come. 3 men disembarked, boots crunching stone, uniforms soaked in spray. One raised a loudhailer. "Researcher, we were ordered to check on communications. Are you there?" My throat tore itself open as I screamed back. I begged, pleaded, yes, I was here. Yes, for God's sakes, take me away. But their faces dimmed when the lighthouse beam swept across them. All 3 froze, as if caught in the act. Their eyes went blank, rolled back white. And when the light passed on, they stumbled forward like marionettes, moving not in their own rhythm, but in the rhythm of the tower. One of them found his voice, a young man with red hair, not more than 30. He staggered toward me, gripping his skull as though it would split. Through clenched teeth, he gasped words that weren't his own. "It's chosen you. Do not resist. If the light falters, they will all come through." Then his mouth stretched wider than it ever should, tearing at the corners, jaw locking open as a storm wind howled from within his throat. The others seized him, dragged him back toward the cutter as though fearful of what would emerge from him. They fled. The boat receded into the mist. No rescue would come. The 17th night brought the final betrayal of my body. I found myself ascending the spiral stairs of the lighthouse, not by choice, but by compulsion. Each step carried the weight of centuries, as though countless feet walked alongside mine. My breathing changed slower and harsher, rattling like a man thrice my age.
The lantern room greeted me as an altar greets its priest. The massive Fresnel lens turned, now filled not with flame, not with electricity, but with something deeper, an ocean light, cold and absolute. When I approached, my reflection stared back with hollow sockets where eyes should have been. Yet I still saw. I reached out without willing it. My hands touched the lens, and when the sweep passed over marsh and water, I felt that presence. The countless watchers, the drowned, the old keepers,
all held back only because I stood here now, bound to the ritual. I understood then the light does not need machinery to turn. It needs a man. It needs a soul tethered to it. And I was tethered. The 18th dawn, if dawn it was, brought the whisper again, now from inside me. You wanted to collect stories. Now you are one. The last light cannot die until you do. I returned to the journals, though my hand shook with alien steadiness. My writing blurred into theirs, no scene between centuries. Words etched themselves, even when I tried not to think them. The sea remembers, the sea waits, and the light binds us as its jailer. I wept. I begged aloud for release, but the marsh was silent, except for pacing footsteps, my own now echoing when I had not moved. It was then I realized, there is no release, only succession, only the next to take my place when I falter. And until then, I am prisoner and warden both. Now when the light sweeps the horizon, I see things others cannot. Phantom ships prowling, faces pressed to the black water's skin, storms that do not touch human lands. The darkness craves to spill in, and it looks to me, its keeper, to fail. I will not. I cannot, for I know the truth etched in every broken life before mine. If the light goes out, the world ends at Grey Marsh Point. So the watch continues, the keeper endures, and one day, when these words are found, understand this: do not come here. Do not seek to know. For the lighthouse will see you long before you see it, and when the lantern stutters, it will already have chosen. The days have rotted into one another. I no longer measure time. I no longer write for myself, but because the tower wills me to. These words are not mine. They are the lighthouse's. On what I believe was the 20th night, I tried for the final time to resist. I smashed glass. I tore at the lamp's machinery. I even hurled ledgers into the sea. Nothing broke permanently. Nothing stayed destroyed. By the next sweep, the glass was whole, the lamp still burning, the journals back on the desk, waiting. It is not made by men. It is made by the sea itself, and the sea does not tolerate rebellion. I fell to my knees and screamed at the marsh, at the darkness, at every drowned soul waiting in shadow. But only silence answered, only pacing footsteps that circled endlessly, matching the turn of the light. It gave me a vision on the last night. The beam swept across the horizon, but instead of ocean, I saw cities. New York skyscrapers, Boston harbors, endless highways, all drowning as the light blinked out, all consumed by a tide of faceless figures rising from black water. And then with the next sweep, it was gone. Ocean again. Marsh. Silence. I understood with final certainty, if I failed, it would not merely be Grey Marsh Point that perished. It would be everything. The entire coast swallowed in one breath, perhaps the entire world. When I descended the staircase, the cottage was no longer mine. The journals no longer looked old. They were fresh, leather supple, the ink newly dried. On the first page, in handwriting I cannot deny as my own, the words waited. Keeper of Grey Marsh Point, October 2025. In that moment, I ceased to be what I was. No name, no history, only the keeper. The tower and I are one. Its breath is my breath. Its light is my sight. I pace the marsh when the beam turns. I hold the line against what waits, and I will do so until the day the tower finds another. If you have found these words, then it means the lighthouse has called you. You think you chose to come here, but you did not. It chose. Leave, if you are still able. Run from the marsh, run from the shore, never look back at the beam. Because if you linger,
even long enough to read this ending. It already sees you. And when the light falters, when you hear the pacing steps in the gravel, you will know your watch has begun. Do tell me in the comments how you liked this story, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next horror story.